Hello, this is Paige, and this is the oral portion of exam 2 for mammalogy. So to get started with the first part, we're going to talk a little bit about echolocation. So echolocation is using reflected sound to locate and discern objects. This is seen in the orders Chiroptera and Cetacea, primarily with the odontocetes, are those toothed whales. So these animals will produce a sound wave that will bounce off of the object that they're trying to locate, and then that reflected sound is able to tell them a lot of information about that object, like how far away it is, its size, things like that. And they really use this to either forage for food or to move around in their environment. So the species that I wanted to touch on that use echolocation are the beluga whales. Again, they're in that toothed whale group that use echolocation a lot for foraging and for capturing prey. So they use about 120 kilohertz frequency when they're echolocating. And they're going to produce these click trains followed by these long buzzes. So you can see highlighted in red there, this is a figure from a study done pretty recently last year, looking at the frequency of these echolocation periods from the beluga. So highlighted in red are those click trains, so they'll produce these kind of fast click trains. They're locating the prey first with these click trains, and then as they get closer to the prey item, to the fish, they'll start to produce these really fast buzzes, which is highlighted in the purple there. So to locate the prey first, they'll use those clicks, and then as they get closer and closer to the animal to capture the prey, they'll use those fast buzzes. Very, very interesting. And of course, they do that with their melon, produce those sounds with those phonic lips that are in their head. So I wanted to touch on a species that we didn't really get to go over too much. We went over the family that they're in, but I wanted to talk about the Sumatran rhino from the order Artiodactyla. And I chose this animal because if you ask anyone who knows me, I love rhinos. They're my favorite animal. I think they're absolutely amazing. And I really only know a whole lot about the Indian rhino from where I work, as well as the white and black rhino, but I don't know a whole lot about this species of rhino. So I wanted to learn more about them and talk to you guys about how awesome rhinos are. So these guys live in the forests of Indonesia. You can see their range to the right there. That's from the IUCN website. And these guys are pretty solitary living in the forest. Their home range is only about 5,000 hectares. So they're not going to travel too much in their habitat. However, they will move upland during flood periods. So they do have a little bit of a seasonal migration in that regard. They have a lifespan of about 40 years, which is kind of average for your typical rhino species. And rhinos also have a pretty long gestation period of 15 to 16 months. And unfortunately, they are listed by the IUCN as critically endangered due to things like habitat loss and fragmentation. So they do live in those forest areas, which of course is harvested a lot, as well as poaching for their horn, unfortunately, which is just made out of keratin. So it's the same thing as our hair, and it really doesn't have any medicinal or monetary value. But unfortunately, the cultures that use rhino horn are so deep and ancient that unfortunately it's still a problem. So moving on into invasive species, this is a really interesting species that I had actually never heard of, but until I started doing research for this portion of the exam. This is the raccoon dog. You can see their native range in the orange there on the map. So they're going to be native to parts of Eastern Asia, Japan. So they live in kind of these cold environments in the forest. And they were introduced to Russia in the early 20th century for the fur trade. So they were basically these farms all over Europe, basically to harvest these animals for the fur trade. Plus, you can see that they have that nice coat on them, so they would probably be used really well in that time period. And unfortunately, some of them got out, and so now they're an invasive species throughout Europe. And they've survived in that environment because they have such a wide range of diet. So these raccoon dogs are omnivorous, so they can pretty much eat anything in that habitat. And so they've been able to thrive in that European environment. So they're causing a lot of problems in that area. Not only are they eating anything because they have such a wide diet, but they're also spreading disease as well, such as rabies. So they are a little bit of a problem there in Europe, but they're a really unique animal. Like I said, I'd never heard of them before working on this part of the exam. So it was really cool to learn about a new animal. So switching gears to the lecture by Vishnu about human-wildlife interactions in India, I found it really interesting to learn about how the people and the animals kind of cope with each other living in the same area, because India is such a populous place. There's so many people living there. And how the wildlife can still kind of survive and thrive, even with all of those people living there. So learning about the leopards that live in the cities in Mumbai, I thought was so interesting how they can thrive in that environment and how they've started to predate on the stray dogs. Seeing that video was so shocking to me. But I did some more research, and not only do these leopards prey on the stray dogs, which are quite a problem there, and here in the United States as well, we have a lot of stray animals that are causing problems for our native wildlife. So these leopards are not only controlling that population of stray animals in India, but they're also helping prevent the spread of diseases. I read an article on National Geographic about these urban leopards, and they prevent about 100 cases of rabies per year. So these guys are actually quite beneficial to where they're living right now and to the people as well. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and talk about the caribou from the 2018 paper. So there's about 5 subspecies of caribou, and one of them is the barren ground caribou, and they're going to be found in Alaska and the British Columbia area in Canada, the Yukon. And so they are listed as vulnerable in the Yukon area. And you can kind of tell these guys apart from other caribou because they have those white socks, kind of. It looks like socks on their hooves. So just above their hooves, they have that white patch of fur. You can kind of see that in the bottom picture there. And they also have that white tail that's pretty distinguishable as well. So they are going to do some migration from their calving grounds to their summer feeding range. And they're going to feed on things like grasses, willows, and sedges during those summer months, and then start to feed on lichen during the winter months, which kind of helps sustain them as they try to survive the harsh winter. Another subspecies of caribou are the period caribou. They're going to live in the Northwest Territories in the Arctic. And that is their range there on the right. These guys are pretty unique. They don't look a whole lot like other caribou, so they're pretty distinguishable. They're mostly that white coloration in the winter time that helps them kind of blend into their environment. And then during the summer months, they're more of like a light slate gray color. These guys are listed as endangered, unfortunately, in their habitat. And these guys are not long distance migrators. They might migrate seasonally to kind of escape that harsh winter, but they're not going to migrate these long distances like other caribou do. They're going to feed not on lichen. Instead, they're going to feed on sedges, willows, grasses, and herbs in their environment. There's also the Svalbard reindeer. They're endemic to the area of Svalbard, which is towards the upper Arctic that you can see on the map there, just north of Norway. And these guys are listed as least concern, so that's good. And these guys are actually one of the smallest caribou or reindeer. They only get to about 90 kilograms, so quite small. And they're mostly that white coloration that you can see in the picture there. Now they are sedentary, so they're not going to migrate at all. They're going to stay in their own range and kind of just bear through that winter period. And they're going to eat a wide variety of vegetation. They're pretty generalists when it comes to what they forage for. Then there is the Scandinavian or Eurasian reindeer. So you can see their range on the right there. So they're going to live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, as well as parts of Russia as well. These guys are listed as vulnerable. And they're going to have a seasonal migration from the tundra to the boreal forests, which are a little bit southward to kind of escape that harsh winter. Now they have a variety of different diets depending on the year. So in the summer, they'll forage for grasses and other shrubs. However, in the winter, like some other reindeer subspecies, they're going to feed on this lichen, commonly called reindeer moss. And the lichen has enough nutrients and protein to kind of get them through the winter months when the food that they eat in the summer is less available. And then there is the Quebec caribou that live in parts of Canada. You can see their range is highlighted there in brown, circled in red. So these guys are going to have that long migration to their calving grounds. They migrate up to 5,000 kilometers a year, going from their calving grounds in the spring back to their summer range. And they're going to, again, feed on willows, birch, and grasses in the summer, and then that lichen in the winter time. All right. Thank you so much for listening.